Hello my lovely nerds and welcome back for another video. I hope you're excited. I am. This week we're going to be exploring the use of science in magic systems, specifically neuromagics. So neuromagics isn't exactly a term that I've ever heard used before. Mainly we call it psionics. It basically means brain power to do magical things. But I never thought that psionics was all that fantasy a term. It felt very sci-fi-y. So that's why I'm going with neuromagics. It's a hill, I'm gonna die on it. For me, this is an absolutely fascinating subject because I did my PhD in neuroscience, not neuromagics. That would have been incredible. Someone one day will probably do a PhD in neuromagics. So what are neuromagics? I'm going to explore them over the course of the video, but they basically split into three categories. They are an amplification of what we already have, an extension of what we have, or the creation of something new that we don't have, which are some of the coolest neuromagics out there. Now, there are many different forms of neuromagics that are already in very common usage across the fantasy genre. This video will touch on some of those, and we'll also touch on some lesser known ones that I think deserve to have a little bit more love than they're currently getting, and also are a really fantastic way for you as an author to kind of put a stamp on something that's yours that other people haven't really been playing around with so much. First up are the amplification types. This is where you have maybe super intellect, super hearing, super vision. Maybe you've got super instincts, so you're actually a precog, or you have better empathy than most, so you're an empath. Some of these are actually things that we kind of have a little bit in society as is. Basically, they are what we can already do, but done an awful lot better. And there's lots of these very interesting types of neuromagics that maybe are used less. One I particularly love is tremor sense, which you see a lot in D&D actually, which is basically where you can feel the vibrations of the ground, and that gives you an understanding of where someone else is, or maybe of earthquakes that are about to happen. So those are examples of the neuromagics that are basically doing a lot better with our senses than we currently can do. Then we get on to the neuromagics that are an extension rather than an amplification. And this means that we're basically using them to influence other beings and or objects. We're talking here about mind control, telekinesis, pathokinesis, which is a cool one, which is basically the ability to control the emotions of other people. There are lots of different types of mind control, which are basically just niche versions of it. For example, affecting someone's feeling of pain or hunger or heat. You know, those are suggestive types of mind control, but they're just more limited. So I'm not going to single them out as being a specific type. They come under the broader category of mind control. Now, again, these are in a way extensions of what we already have. Telekinesis, the movement of objects with your mind, well, you can move objects with your body. Pathokinesis, the manipulation of emotions in other people, well, that's a skill that all authors regularly employ. In fact, they probably wouldn't be very good fiction authors if you weren't able to manipulate the emotions of your readers. Sorry, readers, I love you, but I have to make you cry. That's the whole point. So what should you do if you want to create a neuromagic for your world that is based off an ability or a sense that we already have that you want to either amplify or extend to others, or both? This is what I did with Last Memoria. In there, you have a race of people who basically have superior control over memories than we do, both in terms of amplification and extension. In the amplification sense, that means that they are really good when it comes to remembering things. They could just re-examine the memory, pulling out all sorts of detail, remembering a lot more detail than we can remember, and also they create their memories without the biases that we tend to put into our memories. You know, my memory of an event that happened is probably not the same as someone else's memory of the same event because we put our own interpretations on the memory. Now, that was the amplification, but the Memorii can also extend their memory magic abilities, and by this I mean that they are able to manipulate the memories of others, either taking them or altering or completely fabricating new memories that they put into other people. But amplification and extension aren't the only ways that you can use new cool neuromagics in your world. A really fascinating way of doing it is by creating a new type of magic, by giving your race an ability that we don't have. I'm going to demonstrate this using a real world example of orcas, which killer whales, they're just cool. They have really fantastic navigational skills, and this is basically because they've evolved to have another region in their brain, in the paralimbic region of their brain, an extra lobe that's involved in navigation. So their brain is better than our brain. It can do something that our brain can't, which completely makes sense when you think about how orcas are swimming around in the ocean all day, which is, you know, not exactly filled with signposts. You know, it's kind of hard, I think, to navigate the ocean. I certainly would fail and die on a boat somewhere very quickly, but the orcas have evolved this ability over time. And say, for example, you have a race of people who live in a very featureless environment. Say it's a desert plain somewhere that's just flat and there is no difference there between one patch here and another patch miles and miles away, then it would be really useful for those individuals to have a better ability to navigate. So you could think of a lot of different ways here of making a new form of neuromagic. Really, the sky's the limit. It depends on the environment of the people that you've created and what needs they have in that environment that this new sense or ability could fulfill. So that's it for the creation of new neuromagic side of the video. We're going to move on to how you can take your fantasy cultures to the next level by really incorporating these neuromagics, whichever one you've picked, into the society that you've created. The first question you've got to ask yourself when doing this is your neuromagic going to be prevalent as a majority or minority influence in the society? You can have anywhere between that spectrum, literally everyone, most people, some, very few, one. Wherever your society falls though, this ratio will affect how the neuromagic is perceived and affects the society in general. My personal favorites are the books that are on the higher end of the spectrum where, you know, the magic system's pretty invasive in the society. Most people have it. However, they are not everybody's cup of tea. They are quite intense when you first pick up those books because you're basically writing the other. You're throwing the reader into a world that they do not understand. This is a very hard thing to do well when it comes to a very extensive, different society, which is what tends to happen if you have a neuromagic that everybody can use. And this is something I have had quite a bit of first-hand experience with. I actually wrote a few short stories based in a world of the memory magic people that I was talking about earlier. They're called Memorii, and they have a very different society than ours. They view inheritance as the be-all and end-all. They pass on memories as this inheritance, and they end up creating this society that just feels very different because of it. The consequences of including this memory magic in the world were tremendous. And so by writing a short story from the point of view of people in this world, I was throwing the reader straight in there, and it was very hard to do it well so that I didn't lose them. And this is often why you see authors doing the Harry goes to Hogwarts trick, which is you start in the normal, in the known, and then you introduce the unknown through the eyes of the character, so the reader and the main character are discovering this different world at the same time. This is a good technique. It's been used a lot. I'm not dissing it. I think it's very useful for helping readers explore very complicated worlds. However, it's not my favourite when it comes to reading. And I say this because I really like being thrown into the deep end. I love getting lost in a culture that is so alien to my own. To me, it's more of a challenge to read, but that's what I like. And I know it's not everybody's cup of tea. So, you know, as a creator, as an author, you probably want to take into account whether you want to help the reader along by slowly introducing them with the main character, or if you just want to be like, boom, you're in the world, off you go. Irrelevant of whichever neuromagic you pick, you're going to need to think through the implications if you have a society where everybody or lots of people in that society can use that magic system. So say, for example, you had a society where everyone was a precog. Well, would they ever actually leave the house, or would every interaction they have be an assumption based on what they know was going to happen? One really cool thing that you should definitely consider when you're thinking about a society where everybody has this magic system, whichever one you pick, is how good are people at this magic system across the society? So think about intellect in our world. We have bell-shaped curves of intellect where some people have more, some people have less. I know that's a very simplistic model because actually there's lots of different types of intelligence, but that's for another day. But the point being that not everybody is equal when it comes to these skills and abilities that we have. Vision, I know mine isn't equal to other people's. And the same is true when it comes to whatever neuromagic you're creating. Think about telekinesis. Are there some people who are much better at it than others? This is a great source of conflict in your society. Potentially even it gives you an ability to explore disability in the society, which is something that I love that more authors are doing. Let's move on to the worlds that we create that have fewer members of the society who have these neuromagics. It could be just the villain, just the hero, just a rebel group with these skills, or it could be a minority influence in the society who are fighting for rights because they are neuromagically different from others. The first thing you have to consider in this sense is what is the attitude between the two groups. Are the people with neuromagics feared, awed? Are they hunted because people want to use them as like a way of their getting access to this neuromagic? Nailing this point is key to creating a culture that feels very tangible. Other points to consider: how did the people with the neuromagic come to develop those skills? How is it passed on? Is it an inheritance thing? Is it a magical spider bite thing? Do the people who have the neuromagics use in plain sight, or do they tend to hide away the fact that they have these abilities? Ask yourself these kind of questions and play into the conflict that you create. The more conflict there is, the more plot points you basically create for yourself when you're writing the story, the more difficult situations you create that you could throw your characters into. And one final point to consider when you have a world where not everybody has this neuromagic ability is, why doesn't everybody have this? This is a point that gets skipped over a lot in quite a bit of fiction, which is a mistake because it's a very important point. Because if this neuromagic is so good, which most of them are, the ability to move objects with your mind could be very evolutionarily advantageous if you had it. The ability to remember things better also could have a lot of evolutionary advantages. If these things are so good, then wouldn't everyone in the society have them? Wouldn't the people who don't have the ability have been outcompeted? Now, that's not to say that you can't have societies which have some people with and some people without. It's just that you have to think about the reasoning why. So to do this, maybe you have consequences of the magic. Maybe this neuromagic isn't the be-all and end-all. Say, for example, the telekinesis ability drains you of your energy and actually means that you're more likely to die accidentally from overuse of the magic. There's lots of different consequences that you could create for all different magic systems, and that's really how you're going to create a world that feels unique. It's how the consequences weave into the society and the conflict that creates for your characters. But say you don't want to have a situation where you're using consequences, or maybe the consequences you're using aren't really evolutionary disadvantages, they're more just quirks of the magic system. Then a cool thing to do is to create a situation where you have the minority influence becoming the majority influence because they're outcompeting the previous majority. Say the mind control ability is basically allowing them to be dicks to the people who don't have mind control. This again creates an awful lot of conflict that you can use in your story that is really quite interesting to explore. I mean, it's scary, but interesting. All right, so that's it for this week's video. I really hope you enjoyed exploring how you can use neuromagics more in the fantasy world that you create. It's such a cool space to be. It's basically the confluence of neuroscience, psychology, sociology, and fantasy all smooshed together, and I love being here. I'm just gonna stay writing, reading, hanging out in this space for a bit more. So if you're also in this space, then please leave a comment in the chat if you have a cool neuromagic that you're working on, maybe some exciting consequences of that neuromagic that you're exploring, or even if you've read a really fantastic book recently that explores neuromagics in an interesting way. Please drop your recommendations in the chat because I know I'd love to add them to my TBR pile, which to be fair is pretty big already, but I think these would go straight to the top. So that's it. Please like and subscribe, leave your comments, have a lovely week. I hope you enjoy reading, writing, creating, whatever it is you're going to be doing, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!